just wanted to talk a little bit about a really cool documentary for film fans, for theater fans, for literal film fans, that I really, really enjoyed. This is a documentary by Abel Ferrara, who's mostly known for sort of gritty, edgy, New York City-based films like, early on you had Driller Killer, and you had King of New York, and you had Bad Lieutenant, and on and on and on. And he's done more documentaries of late. This I saw on Canopy, which is a streaming service that a lot of libraries offer for free. Very, very outstanding, amazing streaming service. But I think this is out there on Amazon Prime and probably Tubi. It's out there. It's from 2019, I believe. And it's about this guy, Nicolau. Sorry if I mispronounced the last name. A Greek immigrant who just has for decades worked his way up through the rungs of working in movie theaters in New York City. Started out in the 60s, 70s, Grindhouse and Times Square era, running normal then adult theaters, and moved on to owning a multiplex in Queens now. And it's this wonderful slice of New York movie-going history that I don't think you have to be in any way attached to New York to appreciate. I wasn't attached to New York until recently. I just love movie theaters and going to the movies, and have always heard the tales of, to quote the name of a bookend or documentary, Tales of Times Square, what Times Square movie going was like. How gritty and sleazy and scary and dangerous and exhilarating, and the volume of films that they ran there. And to hear somebody who ran one of those theaters, it's really interesting, and sort of tours some of the old theaters. And a lot of this is just him walking around, talking to Abel Ferrara, who you see on camera and occasionally off camera. And it's a tour of old theaters to a degree. It's a tour of film exhibition history. This guy, Nick, is super likable, clearly a good businessman, but it's nice to hear somebody who really, really cares, who runs a theater, who really cares about the viewing experience. And he talks about that, the way he runs his theaters, the way he promotes things, the way the auditoriums are, what you run and how, just really caring about what somebody who's paid to see a movie, the experience they get, and that it's not damaged in any way. So you get all that. You get a lot of clips of the kind of movies he showed in his theaters. There, I want to warn you. He worked in adult theaters in the 70s. He worked in theaters that showed gay films in the 70s. So if you're at all sensitive to explicit sexual content of any orientation, it's not really dwelled upon, but it's there in this movie for illustrative purposes. So I got no beef with any of that, but I just want to let anybody know who might be watching it, maybe with the family, maybe with a kid. There's some stuff in there from horror movies, from adult films, from all kinds of films to illustrate, what was running and what he ran specifically, that might come as a little bit of a shock if you're just expecting a film about a jovial guy talking about, changing reels back in the 70s. It's interesting to see this guy's story, to see this guy who grew up without much, and the investments he made and how they paid off and how he rolled that into the next thing and the next thing, and how now he owns multiple theaters. I don't want to give it away, but I thought this was fascinating. He lives on a beautiful home, in a beautiful home on a beautiful Greek Isle, and he comes back and forth from New York to Greece all the time. But the people who oversee and manage his theaters are all like in this, I don't want to be over dramatic about it, but like a Bond villain command center, all these screens and monitors and security cameras and microphones, and they're keeping an eye on their theaters in New York City and other places from Greece. So they can see when a film lets out, they can see if something bad is happening, and I think it's sort of less keeping a watchful eye on the employees than it is just making sure from afar that things are going correctly. And that kind of blew my mind, the idea that somebody would be running. A lot of businesses are run, from the head office and run remotely, pulling the strings, but to see that, it is literally being watched over and controlled by the other side of the world is kind of interesting. So if you love old movies like I do, if you're fascinated by what goes on in a projection booth, if you're fascinated in just the business of being a theater owner, being a non-chain theater owner, of which there are not a tremendous lot, certainly probably sadly less now than when this movie was made, I would pretty highly recommend from 2019, The Projectionist.